another episode of stuff I talk about, and coming to you live from northern Israel, as I do so often. What is happening right now with the Trump deal between Hamas and Israel, the ceasefire deal that has been in place now for about 2.5 weeks, and which was supposed to see the immediate return within 72 hours of all of the hostages, alive and dead, from Gaza, as many as possible. Yeah, it was estimated at the time between 3 and 7 might not be recoverable very easily, and it might take longer to find them. But it was presumed that they would get at least the vast overwhelming majority of them back home and not drag it out. Which I told you on the day that this thing was even being formulated and announced in the public, that you would see this process take a long, long time, as long as possible, and that the people, in theory, implementing it would not be implementing it as quickly as they could. So this should not come as a surprise to you if you've been watching my videos, because you know that the Hamas cannot be trusted when it comes to doing the things they say they're going to do to release hostages, etc. They're not a trustworthy organization in that sense, right? Lying, cheating, and stealing is par for the course for them. That's literally part of their whole strategy of Tekiah. And, Mukawama, armed resistance, as they called it. Right? That is literally like par for the course. And if that surprises you, well, then you don't know the course. I don't have to tell you. These are people in an organization that does not believe in being honest. They believe in being duplicitous and getting their way no matter what, no matter how deceitful they have to be. Not as a tactical, practical matter once in a while, but as a generally broad strategy. Right? I'm talking about the people that are okay with using armed violence, right? As a strategic means to their ends, not a tactical, procedural thing that they must do to achieve a specific mission, right? But people who actually use war crimes as a strategic plan, right? That is like the operating procedure. People who target innocent civilians as a part of their overall strategy, not as a tactical matter or an accidental byproduct of their actions. Right? There are people who literally target civilians because they are defenseless. They don't shoot at combatants who are hiding behind civilians and then accidentally hit a civilian as a result, or even shoot at military targets who are next to civilians and then the civilians get hurt as a accident of war. That's not the thing they do. They aim for the largest possible civilian damage first. Any particular military damage that they do is a bonus to them, right? It's like, oh, we got some military damage done too, yay. Bully for us. Now we get to pretend like we don't just target civilians temporarily. But of course, we know that is in fact their exact strategy. It's targeting civilians. That's why it's called terrorism, right? It's when you intentionally target non-combatants for a political objective. That's terrorism in the classical definition sense of it. Now, you can say to me, well, that's not all that terrorism is. There's other kinds of terrorism. When states conduct violence against civilians, it's terrorism. Well, yes, in many cases it is. But in some cases it's not. Right? It really depends. And you can say, well, then that means that just states can conduct all the violence they want and it's never terrorism. No, states can conduct terrorism. It's just like states can conduct genocide. It's all about the intent that is attached to the action. right? The action alone does not give you anything about the intent or the context, right? What was happening around the actual event is so dreaded that matters. And, this is not to justify violent actions against innocent people. Not at all. In fact, I'm condemning that by anybody who does it. But violent actions that harm innocent people are not always intended to harm those innocent people. And when they do harm those innocent people unintentionally, it is awful, it is terrible, it is wrong. But that doesn't necessarily make the side that did the accident, necessarily evil, right? Accidents happen, especially in the fog of war. Now, I'm not saying that's a good thing. No, I'm saying it's a terrible thing. It's a tragic thing. It's an awful thing. It shouldn't happen, but it does. War is not perfect. War is not this surgical thing with ultimate precision. I know people like to say, oh, it's a surgical strike, like as if that's supposed to mean that the machines can't miss. Machines miss. Machines aren't perfect. Laser-guided bombs are not perfect. Yes, the explosion might do pretty much what you estimated it might do, but it doesn't mean it's only going to do that. There might also be unintended consequences. That is part of war. It's ugly and it's brutal, which is why I highly recommend avoiding war if you are governing a nation state. If you are running a military, it is highly advisable not to make war. What is this? Okay, interesting. So, yeah, I mean that's my take, if you will, on the situation at the moment. Is that the ceasefire is holding because of the very reasons that I told you that it would hold when they announced this stupid thing. When I say stupid thing, I mean stupid in the sense that this plan could have been done a lot better and carried out a lot faster than it is currently being done. And once again, part of the reason it's not being done as well as it could be done is because of a certain person who has a certain ego. He's very fragile. He likes to think he's very tough. And if you know who I'm talking about without me saying his name, you know I'm right. That name didn't come into your head for no reason. You thought of it for a reason. And it's not just because his critics say that about him. It's because you agree with it. But again, I don't care, in that sense. If he wants to have his victory dance, fine. But what I'm saying is first earn it. Okay? First earn it. First get the actual bad actors to stop acting badly. Then we can have your little victory dance. No problem. And, you already screwed up the opportunity to close many more problems all at once back in June. Right? Many people in Israel are literally having rockets launched at us on a daily basis. Many people in Israel were really hoping that with a couple more days of fighting, of this disgusting volley of death sticks towards each other, that the people in Iran would rise up and overthrow their dictators. But that didn't happen because a certain somebody needed a certain victory dance. Because he didn't want to be left out of the party. He didn't want Israel to get all the credit if the Iranian people had managed to rise up and overthrow those people before the U.S. came in and knocked out those sites, which obviously would have been unnecessary had Israel managed to do enough damage so that the Iranian people would have risen up and taken matters into their own hands. Now, you can make the argument, and it is impossible to disprove, so I'll give this to you. You can make the argument that there's no way to know that the Iranian people would have actually done that they would have gotten off their backsides and overthrown that government. And you can also make the argument that there's no way that even if they tried that they would have succeeded. You can make that argument. But we'll never know the answer to that because it didn't happen. So all we can do is speculate. So I can speculate that yes, it could have happened, and you can speculate, well, no, it wouldn't have happened, and by the way, it didn't happen. So you're right about that. It didn't happen. But I can still speculate the possibility that it might have, had Israel had even a couple more days. And when you already had Shah Pahlavi up there on camera, inspiring and motivating the people of Iran to get off their backsides and do exactly that, and some people were beginning to listen, and you already had, since some days, the leaders of the Iranian regular army, Atif, saying that they would stand with the people if the people chose to overthrow the government, right? So even though the regular Iranian army is nowhere nearly as well equipped as the IRGC, obviously, they do still have some things they could use to fight against the IRGC, at least to help the protesters to kind of like overthrow them. It doesn't mean they would have won necessarily, but they could have at least made an attempt, and seen what the result would have been. Because, for all you know, it might have worked. We'll never know, because Trump had to have his little victory dance. And again, that whole thing with the victory dance would have been unnecessary had Israel just been allowed to finish the job with the Iranians, and America would not have had to destroy the target sites that it sent the B-2s after. Which, again, because it didn't happen, right, because the Iranian government remains in place, you can easily say, well, then it's a good thing that Trump got rid of those sites with those B-2 bombers. And I will say, yes, it is a good thing, because he didn't allow those other things to happen. So the better outcome in that scenario was that at least he ordered those B-2 bombers to take out those sites. But had he not ordered them to take out those sites, it very well could have been the case that the people of Iran would have overthrown their dictators, and that the people of Iran themselves would have helped the United States and the IAEA and even Israel, right, to find and demilitarize those sites. Right? They would have literally helped Israel, or brought in Israel to help them to demilitarize those sites, or the U.S. would have done it, or any amount of people could have done it. But we'll never know that. And it would have also put an end to a lot of the support that was going to Hamas and the Hezbollah and the Houthis and the Islamic State in Iraq and the Islamic State in Syria and Hamas in Judea and Samaria, and you name it, a bunch of bad shit happening all over the world that Iran directly funds. Not Iran, the people, but the Ayatollahs and the IRGC of Iran directly fund, because they are obviously the world's leading sponsor of terrorist shenanigans. So had their insane ideology become a thing of the past, or at least removed from power, practically speaking, then we're talking about a very different world politics than we have today. And all that could have happened if, instead of a 12-day war, it would have been a 13 or 14 or 15-day war. We will never know. And look, do I want there to be war that's longer? No, I don't want wars that are longer. The shorter the better. But if the outcome of your war is as bad or worse than the state at which you started, then what have you accomplished? And it is no better than when it started, in the sense that, yeah, it's better that we knocked out some sites, we delayed their plans, great, wonderful. But it's no better because now people are like more likely to gang up against Israel. So why are you attacking Iran the next time that you attack Iran? You already destroyed their bombs. Now why are you doing it? You're saying they have bombs again, and there'll be all these insane conspiracies about why Israel is attacking Iran, when we very well know for a fact, yes, they are doing everything they can to rearm, and rebuild everything that was destroyed. And we know for a fact that they still have all the enriched uranium that they need. And they're going to continue to enrich uranium. And they already have facilities that they're working on, which are harder to destroy than the ones that were destroyed in June. Which means the only real way to counter this issue is not to just keep bombing their systems, because that's just not going to work as a long-term solution. Right? The only way this actually works is if we got rid of, right, if Israel is allowed to do what it has to do to get rid of the targets it has to get rid of, that will enable the people of Iran to actually get up off their backsides and do the rest of the work necessary. Right? Like, we know for a fact Israel could have eliminated the Ayatollah at some point during the 12 days. Why they were told not to do it and why they didn't do it is a political mystery that may never be answered, right? It's something that we have to deal with in a long-term sense that we're not likely ever to get a proper reply as to why that actually happened, right? There's a lot of supposition, there's a lot of theories, but there may not ever be an actual clear answer as to why that didn't happen. You may think you know, and you may even be right with what you think you know, but that doesn't mean you necessarily have the full picture, right? And we can theorize, we can talk about it all day till the cows come home. Why wasn't Israel allowed to get rid of the guy in charge? Even though he technically handed over control of the weapon systems to the IRGC, because obviously he's not going to sit there and command them. He's not a warrior type of person. He might like to talk tough, and sometimes, which is kind of funny looking, because the dude's all, decked out in his robes. Doesn't exactly look like a warrior type, but, he says some pretty harsh things. And I guess he can inspire his followers to do crazy, violent stuff. But he's clearly not a, wartime commander type of personality. I mean, look at him and look at his generals. Who do you think would do a better job actually fighting a war? That's why he turned over the control of the IRGC to his, military people. I mean, makes sense, right? Can't fault them for that. But in the meantime, we still have the same regime in power, oppressing the same people, and engaged in building their capability to attack the same countries that they perceive to be as enemies. And not just countries, but people, right? Specific ethnic minorities within their own country and beyond, like here in Israel and around the world. And what's all this? I see many messages. Hello to everybody. What war are you talking about? I'm talking about the war between Israel and Hamas and Israel and Iran. Look at this. Cats or dogs? Well, I like dogs and cats. So that is, that's the big take, basically the big picture on what's happening right now. Why the ceasefire continues to be upheld, so to speak, even though it continues to be broken every day on the technical kinetic level, right? Like yesterday, you had another day where the day started off where the ceasefire was in place, and then there was an attack one way and an attack another way. Ceasefire was in place again after that. And there was another attack and going back and forth, and the ceasefire was in place. So, Hamas started violating the ceasefire as predicted, and attacks from Israel keep retaliating against every violation. And that's also as predicted. And the end result is going to be, as predicted by yours truly, that they are testing the limits to see who will break first. the US or the Arab countries or the EU, which of the major signatories to this peace deal are going to say, we've had enough. Israel, you're attacking Hamas too much. You must stop this war and stop all this ceasefire and just let Hamas keep running Gaza. Okay. Now, at the same time, Hamas has selected half of the board that will replace it in Gaza. They picked like a technocratic board of people that will rule Gaza after they hand over power, in theory. They picked half, and the Palestinian Authority picked the other half. And they picked Amjad Shawa. Amjad Shawa is recognized in Gaza as being a longtime civil society leader in Gaza. Now you tell me, what is a civil society Gazan leader? Exactly. And by the way, he is considered to be pro-Hamas, although not a member of Hamas. How are you going to take that guy for being anything other than a Hamas puppet? And when the entire point of this deal is to get Hamas out of power. Now you're going to say, well, he's not technically a member of Hamas. Yeah, okay, but if he takes his orders from them, then he's worse than being a member of Hamas, in the sense of he can always use the excuse of, well, I'm not in Hamas. Yeah, but you take your orders from them, so you are effectively doing what they ask, which makes you worse because you have no accountability on the one hand, but you do everything they ask for. So, I mean, this is like I told you guys. They're going to just put a pig on a wig and they're going to call it something else, but it's still just a pig. So, don't be surprised if we start to see cracks in the agreement between the different parties holding this thing together, and even disagreements between the people monitoring it in Kiryat Gat. And if you see different takes from different so-called experts and from different YouTubers and influencers who do sometimes a great job of bringing awareness to stuff, but don't always bring the exactitude of details to it that is necessary because of the format of their content. That happens just as much with news shows, by the way, as it does with influencers. So I'm not throwing shade at any influencers, because frankly, the influencers are bringing you just as much information that is very often even more correct than what the news is bringing you, usually because they don't have as much of a bias that's paid for. So they'll do research on multiple sides and sort out their own opinion before they share it with you. At least the good ones will. That doesn't mean they always get it right, but that means that at least they're doing the job that journalists are supposed to do, which they haven't done in ages, because journalists aren't really journalists anymore. They are puppets who work for very specific agenda-driven organizations, and their job is to report the agenda of their bosses, whether they agree with it or not, obviously. It's not to be neutral, right? The days of neutral, objective reporting are long gone. They're a thing of a very distant past. So don't expect neutral reporting in that sense. But yeah, from analysts, commentators, whatever, like me, who talk about this stuff at depth, sometimes we spend a little bit more time in the nuance than may be good for the clicks, but that's because we want to bring you the accurate information, right? Like at the very fine-grained level where it actually matters, beyond the headlines, deep in the bowels of the issue, because that's where the actual changes happen, right? So you should expect that this conflict is not only not over, but is very likely to see itself be kicked up into a higher gear again. It could happen anytime in the coming days or weeks, especially if Hamas keeps dragging its feet about returning every last remaining hostage's body, that they know where they are. And they clearly know, or knew until the most recent round of returns, where bodies were, and pretended that they didn't, right? I mean, it's very obviously, we've We have video footage of them burying remains that they obviously moved from one place to another to pretend as if it was, oh, we suddenly discovered it. No, they knew where it was the whole time. And they were using it as a kind of bargaining chip to be able to say, oh, look, we returned the body. When they didn't actually, because they already returned most of the remains of that body. Yesterday, they returned some of the remains of the body, which they had already said, no, there's, we've already returned everything we have from this person in 2023 and 2024. Now suddenly they have more from him, which of course is psychological torture for his family, since they have to dig up his grave again. And obviously that means they're playing games, because they're like, whoa, we keep returning bodies. No, you keep returning more remains of bodies that you already knew you had and that you've already returned parts of, because you're sick and twisted people. Right? They should have returned that body the moment they found it. I mean, they should have never taken it in the first place, but once they already had agreed to return that body, they should have returned all of it and not held on to parts of it for multiple releases later on. That's just sick and savage behavior that has no place in the society of men. That is not the kind of thing that keeps you on the list of people that should stay on this planet. That puts you on the short list of people that if you were gone, people that if they were gone, they would not be missed by decent human beings, right? Because you're literally keeping the remains of dead people hostage, preventing their family from getting any closure. There's only one reason to do that: it's psychological torture. When you're intentionally doing it to cause the family pain and suffering. So, yeah, that's the situation, right? Israel is very likely to see more conflict in Gaza before this is all over, and we are very likely to see more conflict with Iran, whether we like it or not, before this is all over, because Iran is, again, the head of the snake in this whole geopolitical soup of conflict, right? That they are clearly, right? They are, yes, Iran has problems with resource management at the moment, right? Like they're not managing their electricity and their water very well. They're doing a pretty bad job, right? But they still have resources. They're still a very wealthy country when it comes to natural resources and human capacity. Like there's a lot of people there. So, not a small country. They got a lot of talent in their talent pool. Don't kid yourself. Don't think that Iran, because they don't have weapons as powerful as America, that they're some kind of a dumb country. They're not a dumb country. There's many very brilliant people in Iran. Don't kid yourself. They have a very high IQ on the global scale. Yeah. An extremely well-educated population in general. Are there uneducated people there? Of course there are uneducated people there. Are there many uneducated people there? Of course there are many uneducated people there. But are there also a lot of educated people? In fact, more than uneducated? Yes. Most Iranians are well educated. Now, do they learn some nonsense that's forced into them through indoctrination? Of course they do. They're taught to hate. They're taught to despise certain people because of their ethnicity or their religion or whatever. And they'll pretend it's not because of their religion, but it very obviously is. But does that mean that all Iranians are bad people? Of course not. Absolutely not. That's why the Israeli people, most of us stand tall with the Iranian people. We want them to be free. We have gigantic sympathy for them. We feel terribly that they're being oppressed by the Ayatollahs and the IRGC. Right? It is absolutely awful what's happening to them. There's nothing positive about that. We want them to have the same kind of freedoms that we have. We want them to have peace with us. We're not interested in fighting with the Iranian people. We have no bones to pick with them. You can tell me, oh, things weren't always good with the Jews in Iran, and a lot of Iranian people made Jews feel very uncomfortable, this and that, before the Shah and even during the Shah. You can say all that. Okay. We Jewish people have this ability to go through trauma and move on. Because if we stayed stuck in our trauma forever, we would never make any progress and we would have been gone long ago. And notice that other societies that have this ability also seem to survive and thrive through trauma after trauma after trauma. That's why we have no problem saying, okay, yes, these terrible things happened. Sure, we can recognize it, we can remember it, we can acknowledge it, we can memorialize it, we can do all kinds of things about it. Make a holiday for it, whatever you need. Make special foods, whatever. You got to have food if you're going to have a Jewish holiday. Just saying. But that doesn't mean we're going to let it freeze us in our tracks and never move forward. That would be unacceptable. That would be very un-Jewish of us. That would be very non-Jewish, not kosher. That would be like basically doing the antithesis of what it means to actually be, well, effectively, to be a Jew, right? Because our people have lived through so many traumas that it would be a very impractical way to try to live your life. You want to see some earth? You guys want to see some earth? Earth! Earth, baby. We're walking in the earth here. I'm walking here, But I'm not walking in a big city right now. I'm walking out in the fields. And yeah. So that's my take. Curious to know what you think. Leave a message. Area. Tell me what you think about my take on the whole Israel, Hamas, Trump ceasefire, and whether or not you think it's going to hold, or whether or not you think it's going to fall apart, or whether or not you think it's going to have some other kind of conclusion than those that I have presented to you as very likely possibilities, because they are. Let me know, I'm curious. I want to know what you think. Do you think that the Hamas is actually going to give up their weapons to a group that isn't controlled by them? Do you think they're actually going to withdraw from power and hand over power to a group that really isn't controlled by them? Do you think they're actually going to leave the political scene in Gaza? Do you think that those who want to stay in Gaza are actually going to renounce violence? Do you think that those who refuse to renounce violence are all going to leave in order to get amnesty? These are many of the questions that you should be asking yourself if you care about this issue, because these are the very questions that people in Gaza need to deal with, especially if they are affiliated with Hamas and or any group that might take over Gaza after they leave. Right? Is Hamas going to try to hand over power to a group of Palestinians, like they said, or are they going to hand over power to an actual international group as specified in the deal? Since they've already created a group of Palestinian technocrats to hand power to, you can already see they've already broken the deal again in that sense. They're not going to hand over power to an international group. Now, as I said before, they might hand over power to a local group, and then that local group can hand over power to an international power. Or an international group. Do you really think that's going to happen? Or do you think that Hamas is going to hand over power to some local group that they actually control, made up of the board members and the leader that they chose, which they've already picked and chosen those people, and then they will simply keep that power in those new hands and operate under that rebrand? have all the same people in all the same leadership positions, the same leadership structure, just operate under that new brand. What do you think is more likely to happen? Personally, I think that's more likely to happen. Why? Well, what evidence do I have to the contrary? Like, literally, what evidence is there to the contrary? All we see is that they're doing exactly what I've been saying they're going to do. So how can we assume that they will do anything different than what I've been predicting, since until now they have done literally everything I predicted? Is there a probability that I'll be wrong about the next steps? Sure, of course there's a probability. Somebody's got to clean up that litter. There's a probability that somebody will do the right thing and that they will withdraw from power and give up their guns and withdraw from the political scene. Of course there's that possibility. Would you lose sleep over it? I know I wouldn't. It's not worth it. They're not trustworthy enough. Right? They are bad actors looking to do bad things. No way. No way. Button. Hey, Lemon. How you doing? All right. Seeing different cats. All kinds of different cats. I know. Distractions here, people. But anyway. I hope you get my points, and I hope you appreciate the info I'm bringing you and the clarity, hopefully, that I'm bringing you to this. I personally don't trust the Hamas as far as I can spit, and I don't think they're going to do anything that they've agreed to exactly the way they agreed to it. They've already demonstrated that they haven't done any of the things that they agreed to do exactly the way that they agreed to, by the clock, etc. Right? They were already violated the agreement in many ways. By the way, there were even violations in the way and the timing of the release of the actual living hostages too. Let's not forget. Sure, they all brought them out within a couple of days, whatever, but they did not bring them out exactly according to plan. There were delays here and there. People forget that because they're all back and alive, and that's what we're grateful for. But if you want to be pedantic about it, you can go back and criticize that too, because those things were also not done according to the agreement, very specifically. And they did that on purpose, to do the immediate testing of the limits of our patience. They're very shrewd in that sense. They're not messing about. And that's why I keep saying, we have to keep an eye on this. And I will continue to bring you, updates about it, obviously, because this is a situation with an active, ongoing crisis management mode in effect. And it impacts a lot of people. And it affects a lot of people directly or indirectly, of course, in the region here, but also around the world. People care about what happens here, for which I'm actually very grateful. At the same time, it's heartbreaking because it means they don't care as much about people in other conflicts around the world, where there are just as many, if not far more, in most cases, people being harmed and ended, right? For no reason other than their ethnicity or religion or national identification, whatever it might be, right? The geolocation they happen to live in. Like the war in Nigeria, right? The Christians being slaughtered there constantly, right? The war in Syria. I know it seems like, it's over now. It's not really. Okay. And on and on and on, right? Fighting still in Yemen, fighting still in Sudan. There's no shortage of conflict still ongoing. So hopefully we will see an end to all this and soon. But I ain't waiting up, mates. So like, subscribe, follow, whatever you call it. Leave a comment. And hopefully I will see you guys in the next one. Peace. Shalom.